So all of these different players, all of these different entities that kind of have cropped up in your piece throughout time, what do they have in common? You know, I think everybody, the simple thing that we want, I don't know if we're going to get this, but the simple thing we want is we want to know who is the mastermind behind all of these different things that you have pointed out in this, all of these different, you know, this web that you have. Everybody wants to know who is the spider that made the web and what is their motivation. Or is it that this is just a bunch of powerful people that are all interconnected, all with a bunch of different motives, and they're using each other, and the same players keep popping up over and over again? But you know, how is it all connected if it's connected at all? Is there a big spider with one big motive?
It's hard to say who's behind it all, right? And I mean, I understand why a lot of people have that question, but it's not a very easy question to answer. So, for example, someone like Jeffrey Epstein, whose face is put out there, and even people like Bill Gates, I see people like that sort of as middle management, as frontmen for this particular system, and not necessarily the people pulling the strings on their own, right? Um, if you ask me who's behind it, I don't really have names to give you, but what I can say is that based on my research, there was an alliance more or less between intelligence and organized crime and corporate power. And that's really essentially, the three pillars that came together to create the system that we have now. And, we've consistently been lied about how power really functions in the United States and beyond for a very long time. But at the end of the day, you have intelligence and organized crime, which have more similarities than differences at the end of the day. They're both essentially unaccountable and engage in criminal activity, make a lot of money, engaging in illegal activity, whether it's drug trafficking or arms trafficking or sex trafficking, things like that. And then you have a lot of people involved with one or both entities being installed throughout history in the most powerful corporations over time. I mean, it really is, I see it as sort of like a cartel that's taken control of corporate America. And then you have the subversion of the American, political process. Corporations are people, political donors and all of this stuff. And over time, and especially if you consider the role of blackmail, elevating people who you have dirt on from the very beginning into positions of power, over the decades, it becomes very easy for a cartel of this nature to dominate policymaking and dominate our lives. And, frankly, I think the reason that the world is being pushed in the direction it's being pushed right now is because the jig is about to be up, because this particular cartel, if we can call them that, has eluded the American population and much of the world, and caused a bunch of wars and death and destruction for decades and decades and decades. And they can't kick the can down the road anymore. Eventually, all of this looting of pension funds, of treasuries, you name it, they've looted it, is going to come back home to roost at some point. And in order to avoid the pitchforks at their door, they sort of have to control how that system, they have to basically do a controlled demolition of that system, because if it collapses on its own and people are understandably angry, and we have a repeat of, Occupy Wall Street, but more extensive and more, aggressive, they don't want that. They're looking to usher in this new economic paradigm that equates, that has programmable money, which is essentially a control system masquerading as a financial system, to prevent people from uprising and demanding a bigger piece of the pie, or, a fairer system or anything like that, which is ultimately against their interests. They want to be able to keep what they've stolen, and they don't want to be challenged for it.
But it just seems to me like this would be almost impossible to root out. If we're going to go after this marriage of intelligence and corporate power and organized crime, it's like, I mean, you'd have to go after so many people, would have to be ousted from their positions. That not only that, but we wouldn't know exactly who to get. I mean, there are some names you could name, right? I mean, you've got Jamie Dimon, who is ultimately, we could just simplify it and say he's like in charge of the Fed. And then you could say you've got Antony Blinken, who's in charge of our wars. You've got the Clinton Foundation that you also name in this piece. So you've got presidents, potential presidents, secretaries of state. You've got bankers, you've got intelligence agencies. This would be so many, and they've all been placed into these positions of power and elevated into these positions of power because they were sanctioned by somebody in the back rooms said, this is the person we want to elevate, this is the person we want to push, this is the person we want to fund, this is the person we want out there. How do we even begin? And I know this whole thing, we were supposed to be talking mostly about Jamie Dimon, but ultimately I think he's just another player in all this. Like you said, Epstein, Bill Gates, Jamie Dimon. And, this is all coming to the forefront because of the Virgin Islands lawsuit against Chase saying, hey, you guys knew about Epstein's sex trafficking and you guys did nothing about it. And that's definitely bringing all this to the forefront, this amazing investigating that you've done, this amazing piece that you've written. But now you've got all these names, you've got all these people, and this goes back way back. I mean, decades. So how do we even begin naming names and rooting out these people to ensure it collapses? It seems like if we get one, the rest of it still stays up because we're not naming all of them. We're not getting rid of all of them. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does seem hard, right? But I think, it's sort of a matter of perspective. Ultimately, what has happened over the past several decades is that Americans and other people around the world have been made dependent on corporations. We've outsourced our, entire lives and basic needs to corporations that want to enslave us, essentially. And, whether that's, what you've had, like I mentioned earlier, in the banking sector over time has been increased consolidation. It's been the same in a lot of other sectors, as well. Like Amazon has ballooned into this giant, and a lot of, mom and pop stores, whether it was Walmart or Amazon, they've been taken out. We have to return to how things were before to an extent by decentralizing a lot of this power that has become increasingly centralized, not just as it relates to things like the government, but also as it relates, to the other side of things on the private or the business side of things. There needs to be an effort to not use these systems, divest from Amazon, divest from big tech, all of the stuff, and look, to not be so dependent on them, because if you're completely dependent on them, they can herd you wherever they want. And I think that's ultimately where this is going. So I think it's time for people to take personal responsibility and decide, vote with your wallet, I guess, in a sense. Stop giving money to these corporations that are hurting us towards this dystopian future, and start building things locally or building alternatives, parallel systems, whatever, because now is the time to do that. You don't want to wait until there's no ability or option to do that later on, right. Which, the way they're making it is definitely a real and very scary possibility.
But it seems almost like, how can we even combat it? That's been the discussion when I talked to economist Richard Werner, for example, who's a big advocate of using a small community bank. He wants to set up a lot of small community banks because then if you decentralize away from the Federal Reserve, away from this, the big behemoth that's coming after us and all of the money, that is how we remain powerful as a people. Right, is by using this small going local more than anything. But again, when the Fed can go and pick and choose the winners and the losers and can just go to a bank like Signature Valley Bank of New York and say, we don't care if you're solvent, we're shutting you down. It's like, how do we can't even combat. I guess the thing that would be the most important thing is this exposure of it, which is what you're doing. You expose it, you show these are the connections, these are all the power, these are all the players involved, and they're so interconnected. I thought for sure going into reading your piece, okay, this is going to be simple. I mean, I knew anything I read of yours is not ever simple, but I figured, okay, we're going to see a connection between Jamie Dimon and Epstein and how they probably schmoozed together on islands, and Jamie Dimon took all these private flights to the island and did all, and I got none of that. Instead, it was this much deeper web of connections of how Jamie Dimon came to be. And when you get to that, the inner workings of how he became one of the most powerful people in the world ultimately, there's so many other players behind him that are really, truly controlling. Who would you say is actually controlling him?
So what I note in the piece is, Yeah. So what I note in the piece is that, I said earlier, basically summarizing the piece, the people behind Epstein are the same people essentially responsible for Jamie Dimon being in the position he's in now. So you have this particular faction of, the Wexner crowd, I guess, being the Columbus, Ohio part of the Bank One directors. And then the other side of this, you have the Crown family. So you had a couple other directors that weren't Crown, but the other prominent ones that were involved in this decision with Diamond, for example, were in charge of companies that the Crown family owned, like Sara Lee Corporation, for example. And then you have some other figures that were responsible for choosing Jamie Dimon. Richard Manoogian, I think is how you say his name. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that totally wrong, but he was an associate of Leslie Wexner's business mentors, A. Alfred Taubman and Max Fisher. So you have more connections to the same Wexner crowd there. And then you have another guy that was really involved in choosing Dimon, John Hall, the longtime CEO of Ashland Oil, which was outed by the New York Times, taking an insane amount of money from the CIA for undisclosed purposes, bribing numerous governments involved with this private CIA group we mentioned earlier as it related to Libya and Oman. These are the same characters keep coming up again and again, right? When you're looking at this particular story. And then again, the Crown family, they're important too. They have organized crime ties going back to the patriarch of their clan, Henry Crown, born Henry Krinsky, who created Material Services Corporation. And the success of that company was intimately tied to his connection to Chicago organized crime, the Chicago mob, Al Capone, Sam Giancana, those types of figures. And he eventually merged that company and took control of General Dynamics, the weapons manufacturer. And his son, Lester Crown, inherited most of the businesses from him. And Lester Crown was involved in a lot of very controversial stuff as it related to General Dynamics contracts with the Pentagon. And actually, the Pentagon tried I think actually 3 times, to revoke Lester Crown's security clearances because of controversial stuff going on there. Crown was involved in bribing government officials, for example, in the state of Illinois, I believe. And General Dynamics, under his watch, was involved in mishandling classified information. And some of the products they were producing were the target, actually, of an Israeli intelligence operation involving Robert Maxwell as it relates to the Promise software scandal, which was to get this particular software product that had been stolen from Inslaw Inc. And bugged by Israel, and later a different version was later bugged by the CIA for different purposes. But this version, bugged by Israel, was sold to nuclear warfare labs in the United States by Robert Maxwell. An FBI counterintelligence operation into that was shut down from the highest levels because Ed Meese, then Attorney General under Reagan, was financially involved with the beneficiaries of the Promise scandal. I mean, it's a very big hive there, but there's a lot of crazy stuff there. And then, of course, you have Crown also being part of this group that Leslie Wexner co-founded in 1991, either called the Study Group or the Mega Group, depending on who's talking about it, I guess. But both names have been used. And if you look at the members that have been admitted of this particular group, a lot of them have ties to these same particular organized crime networks. That ended up merging with our intelligence agencies, in the post-World War II period. So who controls Jamie Dimon? Again, I can't really give you names except beyond, these people and the fact that they've been involved in the same scandals that push up against each other and overlap consistently over the past several decades. But it's, since we have such a long timeline and there's so many overlaps and the same pattern of behavior over and over again, it's very hard to call it a coincidence.
It would be so much easier if it was just one group, one people, one person, one family, one country, or one, it would just be so much easier if we could just root it all back to one place and then say, all right, well then that's the culprit.
I think we've sort of been, told that power works a certain way, and we want it to be simple, right?
Right.
Like Hollywood, for example, has made us really partial to these narratives that are black and white, good versus bad, right?
Yeah, get
this
the
guy's
bad
bad
guy
and this guy's good. Right. But when you're looking at nation states or some of these other actors, there's a lot of gray area, and a lot of power as it functions today is transnational. It's not exclusive to any one government, right? You have the rise of the multinational corporation. And then going back to what I said about Samuel Pisar and the trans ideological corporation, there's been a particular faction of very powerful business people going back decades that wanted to create a block of corporations more powerful than the nation state. And I mean, I think that has definitely happened when you look at the tentacles of, giant asset managers like BlackRock all over the world, or, Blackstone and all of these other entities. I think it's pretty clear that capital and power have transnational flows, and it's very hard to say, it's exclusive to this group and exclusive to that. At the end of the day, it's a lot more complex than we've been led to believe. And I think a lot of people like the easy, simple story, so we can all say this is the one bad guy. But at the end of the day, I think what people need to realize is that the system is completely rigged and it's corrupt. And it's time, like you said earlier, to get local and start, building some sort of parallel system, because the only way to starve the existing system is to stop using it. And we have to figure out how to do that. And we have to do that relatively quickly.
Yeah, I mean, really, really quickly. I mean, this stuff has been going on for for several decades, but it seems like they're rapidly at this point now with the rolling out, with their intention to roll out the CBDC. It seems like they're rapidly moving towards trying to control us completely with that, controlling our purchases, controlling our speech, controlling all of, if you could control the money, you could control the people. I've been saying that over and over. If you can get control of their money, then that's their livelihood.
Well, that's
that's the way they
Kissinger,
feed
right?
their families. Yeah.